Welcome to Cruise News, your daily update on everything happening at sea. Visit cruisenews.io to see today's stories and sign up for email alerts.
So, imagine this scenario for a second. You were standing on the curb outside the cruise terminal in Long Beach, California.
Oh, I know that curb well.
Right, and you were frantically checking your watch, just staring at this gridlocked line of rideshares and realizing there is absolutely no way you are going to make your noon flight out of LAX.
Which is the worst feeling. Your vacation is basically ending on this massive spike of stress.
Exactly. But the wildest part is that your delay wasn't caused by, like, traffic on the 405 or anything in California. You missed your flight because of a marine traffic jam of tender boats 1,000 miles away in Mexico.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate butterfly effect. I mean, as passengers, we tend to view a cruise ship as this insulated bubble of relaxation, just the resort that happens to float.
Yeah, you're worrying about packing the right sunscreen or securing your dining reservations. Right. But the reality is that a modern cruise ship is this massive, highly dependent piece of global infrastructure. Every single itinerary is at the mercy of immense structural forces operating behind the scenes.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We are putting those invisible forces under the microscope to see how they actually dictate your getaway.
Yeah, looking at the macro and the micro.
Exactly. From, global geopolitics, literally locking ships out of their home ports, to government paperwork suddenly opening up an entire continent, to those local harbor bottlenecks that fundamentally rewrite your morning commute home.
And the Celestyal Cruises situation is perhaps the most glaring current example of how these macro forces operate right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you have a localized conflict on the other side of the planet actively tearing up the spring calendars for thousands of passengers who book European sailings.
Yeah, so let's get into that. Celestial just wiped a whole slate of spring 2026 departures completely off the board for late March and early April. And these are like highly anticipated Mediterranean and Adriatic itineraries, the iconic Aegean and iconic Greek island sailings, plus departures from Piraeus and Lavrion.
Yeah, calling at places like Mykonos, Santorini, Rhodes, Kusadasi.
Kotor, Dubrovnik. And the thing is, the ports are open, the weather in Greece is warming up, everything in the Mediterranean is perfectly fine.
Right. The disruption is entirely on the supply side. I mean, the two vessels scheduled to sail those routes, the Celestial Discovery and the Celestial Journey, are physically trapped in the Middle East.
Trapped? Wow.
Yeah, they were scheduled to reposition back to the Mediterranean after their winter Gulf season. But instead, they are delayed indefinitely due to the regional conflict that escalated back on February 28th.
So wait, where are the ships right now?
Well, the Discovery is currently docked in Dubai, and the Journey is sitting alongside in Doha.
Okay, so they're safe?
Oh, yeah. Celestial confirmed all guests safely disembarked at the start of the conflict. Both vessels are fully operational. They're fully crewed. They just cannot move.
Because of the Strait of Hormuz, right?
Exactly. The closure of the strait has created this hard physical barrier.
It's crazy to think about. I've always thought of a repositioning cruise as this, highly orchestrated, multi-million-dollar military supply chain deployment. Like every nautical mile, every fuel stop, every provision load is calculated perfectly.
That supply chain analogy is spot on.
Yeah.
The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical and honestly narrowest maritime passages on Earth. So when authorities halt civilian shipping, through that choke point, a vessel inside the Persian Gulf is operationally landlocked.
Yeah, but I think the immediate reaction from a lot of people looking at a map is usually, well, the ship floats, right? Why don't they just sail a different route, like detour around Africa and come up through the Gibraltar Strait?
Right, the armchair admirals. But bypassing a major choke point on a whim is basically a logistical impossibility for a commercial passenger vessel. First off, the Strait of Hormuz is the only exit from the Gulf.
Oh.
You cannot start a detour if you cannot leave the starting area. But even if these ships were, say, anchored just outside the strait in the Arabian Sea, an impromptu detour around the Cape of Good Hope introduces massive mechanical and legal hurdles.
Like fuel, I'm guessing.
Exactly. Fuel bunkering limits are a huge deal. A ship scheduled for a 3-week repositioning through the Suez Canal with frequent port stops is just not provisioned for that. Not with heavy marine fuel, not with dry goods. They can't just steam continuously for a month around the African continent.
Right, that makes total sense. And then you have to factor in maritime insurance restrictions. I mean, navigating anywhere near active conflict zones triggers war risk surcharges from insurers.
Oh yeah, and those run into the millions of dollars per week. And that's assuming the underwriters even allow the vessel to transit in the first place.
Which is a big if. And add in the maritime union regulations regarding crew working hours and mandatory shore leave, and an impromptu African detour just completely blows up the operational budget and the timeline anyway.
Right, so the cascading effect is immediate and severe.
Mhm.
Passengers booked on those late March and early April Mediterranean sailings are getting full refunds or future cruise credits.
And it's not just Celestial, right?
No, the disruption is sweeping through the whole region. TUI Cruises has already suffered multiple cancellations for the Mein Schiff 4 and Mein Schiff 5.
Mm.
And Saudi Arabia's Arroyo Cruises had to just terminate all remaining Arabian Gulf sailings for its 2026 season entirely.
Wow. Which fundamentally alters the long-term risk calculation for cruise line executives, I would imagine. I mean, they plan these fleet deployments years in advance.
Years. Yes.
So if deploying a multi-million-dollar asset to the Arabian Gulf for the winter carries a heightened risk of that asset getting trapped and wrecking your lucrative summer Mediterranean launch.
Executives are going to seriously reconsider the viability of winter Gulf season.
Exactly, because the water the ship sails on is governed by volatile, real-world geopolitics. And that volatility ultimately decides if your vacation happens.
Absolutely. But, that physical friction in the Middle East stands in stark contrast to what we are observing in Asia right now.
Oh, totally different story over there.
Yeah, we are seeing the massive impact of structural forces there as well, but in the complete opposite direction. I mean, the sudden erasure of a massive bureaucratic barrier is fundamentally altering fleet deployments and port traffic almost overnight.
Right, we were talking about the sheer power of paperwork, or rather, the power of getting rid of it entirely.
Yes.
On February 17th, China expanded its 15-day visa-free transit policy, and the immediate tangible impact on the cruise industry in Shanghai is just staggering.
It really is. To appreciate the magnitude of this shift, you have to consider the intense friction of the old system. Getting a tourist visa for mainland China was never a casual undertaking.
No, it was a whole ordeal.
Exactly. Passengers had to gather extensive documentation, sometimes surrender their physical passports by mail to a consulate.
Which is always terrifying.
Totally terrifying.
Mm.
Or you had to pay a premium to a courier service, pay significant fees, and then wait weeks for approval. And if there was, a clerical error on the application, or if the stamp wasn't processed in time...
You were denied boarding at the pier.
Right. It was a massive source of anxiety and a major deterrent for booking Asian itineraries in the first place.
But killing off that process is unleashing so much pent-up demand. Within just 2 weeks this spring, 3 major ships tested this new policy, and the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, let's talk about those numbers.
Well, the test run kicked off on February 25th when Holland America Line's Westerdam arrived from South Korea. This was a 2-day port call with 2,000 passengers, mostly from Europe and North America.
And they berthed at the Wusongkou International Cruise Terminal during the Lunar New Year period. Shanghai really rolled out the red carpet for them.
They really did. The city organized a massive drone light display over the Huangpu River. They had traditional lion dances on the pier.
Yeah, the Westerdam arrival was a highly publicized signal that the region is open for business. But the subsequent arrivals of the luxury vessels really demonstrate the operational success of the policy change.
Right, because of the uptick percentages.
Exactly. On March 6th, Regent's Seven Seas Explorer arrived at the Shanghai Port International Cruise Terminal on the North Bund. Local authorities reported that 99% of the passengers utilized the 15-day visa-free entry.
99%.
Yeah, and a few days later, on March 11th, the Luminara made its first call to mainland China at the same terminal, and over 80% of its foreign guests used the visa waiver.
Okay, looking at those adoption numbers, 99% and over 80%, it strikes me that erasing this paperwork is doing significantly more heavy lifting for Shanghai's tourism revenue than, say, pouring concrete for a new mega terminal.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because we constantly see cities trying to establish themselves as regional cruise hubs by spending hundreds of millions of dollars on physical infrastructure, just hoping the shiny new buildings will attract the ships. It's like removing a massive toll booth on a crowded highway.
That's a great way to put it. The capital investment of a policy change is zero, but the yield is immediate and recurring. A city can construct a state-of-the-art, visually stunning terminal, But if it still requires a passenger to spend 3 months and $200 just to get permission to walk down the gangway.
Yeah, cruise lines will simply route their ships to more accommodating countries.
Exactly. By expanding this 15-day transit waiver, Shanghai has reduced administrative friction to near zero.
And that seamless entry is specifically vital for attracting the luxury market, right? Ships like the Seven Seas Explorer and the Luminara trade on the promise of an effortless, highly curated premium experience.
Right. Nobody paying luxury prices wants to deal with red tape.
No. Forcing those guests to stand in a sterile immigration line for 3 hours to have their passports scrutinized completely shatters that illusion of luxury.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
allowing 99% of a luxury ship's complement to simply walk off the vessel and engage with the city for up to 15 days,
Yeah.
provided they transiting to a third country, of course, instantly made Shanghai one of the most attractive port of call destinations in the hemisphere.
And it drives immediate local spending in restaurants, retail excursions, all achieved entirely through the stroke of a pen.
Exactly. But, you know, when a destination successfully removes that friction and becomes incredibly popular, we eventually see a bottleneck emerge on the other side of the equation.
Right, because you invite all the ships in with the macro-level policy changes, but the sheer physical volume of those vessels requires intense micro-logistical adjustments to keep the itineraries functioning.
And that brings us to the west coast of the United States and the Mexican Riviera, which are currently providing basically a masterclass in how local capacity constraints force industry-wide operational shifts.
Yeah, Carnival Cruise Line recently announced adjustments to 11 Carnival Panorama sailings departing from Long Beach, California, spanning between August and November of 2026.
Right, and to be clear, they are not removing any ports from these itineraries.
No, passengers will still visit all the stops on their Mexican Riviera vacation. What is changing is the specific sequence of the ports and, more importantly, the exact hours the ship is tied up at the dock.
The August 15th, 2026 sailing provides a really clear example of this restructuring. The original routing has essentially been scrapped.
Because they're adding a sea day, right?
Right. They are now adding a sea day at the very beginning of the voyage, before arriving in Cabo San Lucas and then progressing to La Paz, Mazatlan, and Puerto Vallarta.
And across all 11 of the modified sailings, Cabo San Lucas is the destination most frequently, having its arrival and departure times tweaked.
Yeah, Cabo is definitely the pain point there.
Well, the notification sent out to booked guests was signed by Colleen Oliverio, Carnival's VP of Guest Services, and the language in the letter really caught my attention.
Oh, the corporate speak.
Yes. She described the changes as, quote, schedule and sequencing adjustments intended to enhance operational efficiency.
Right.
Let's translate that corporate spin for a moment. Whenever I hear a phrase like enhance operational efficiency regarding a transit schedule, I immediately assume they are baking a massive buffer into the timeline because the underlying infrastructure is just failing to handle the volume.
Yeah, like adding 20 minutes to your morning commute because traffic has gotten worse.
Exactly. This sounds like Carnival is being forced to add slack to the schedule because the Mexican Riviera ports are suffering from severe maritime gridlock. Am I off base there?
Not at all. You are interpreting that corporate communication perfectly. The Mexican Riviera is experiencing unprecedented demand, and Cabo San Lucas is the primary choke point.
Because it's a tender port.
Exactly. Ships do not tie up to a physical pier there. They drop anchor out in the bay and utilize small motorized boats, the tenders to ferry passengers back and forth to the marina.
And when you have 2 or 3 megaships dropping anchor on the exact same day,
the geometry of moving 10 to 12,000 people across the water simultaneously creates an absolute nightmare for marine traffic control.
I can't even imagine. The harbor must get completely clogged.
It does. The tender boats have to queue up just to dock at the marina, then they offload and queue up again to get back to the ship.
So the boarding process just slows to a crawl.
Right. And cruise lines know this congestion is unavoidable, so they are forced to build operational slack into the itinerary. If a ship's captain knows the afternoon tendering operations in Cabo will be delayed by an hour due to harbor traffic, they just have to push back their departure time.
And that delayed departure means less time to steam up the coast, which alters the arrival time at the next port.
Exactly. It's a domino effect.
And that slack eventually travels all the way up the coastline and fundamentally alters the logistics at the home port in Long Beach, which is where those delays finally hit the passenger's wallet.
Yeah, this is where it gets real for the guests.
Carnival is shifting the Long Beach departure times. So, for instance, the September 6th sailing is pushing its sail away from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., but Crucially, they are also delaying the return arrival times.
Right, which is the big issue.
Yeah, for several specific sailings in September, October, and November, the Panorama will return to Long Beach at 10 a.m. instead of 9 a.m.
And, a 1 hour delay at the home port might not sound like a lot, but it has a massive ripple effect on disembarkation because it compresses the entire turnaround window.
Because of the customs process, right?
Exactly. When a ship arrives in a U.S. port, it must undergo a zero-out process. Every single passenger must disembark and clear Customs and Border Protection before any new passengers are allowed to board.
And CBP operates on highly rigid staffing schedules.
Very rigid.
So if the Panorama docks at 9 a.m. as originally planned, the customs officers are in place and the flow of, 4,000 passengers begins smoothly.
Right. But if the ship doesn't dock until 10 a.m., that clearance process gets pushed back. The officers might be processing a different terminal, or their shift structure gets complicated.
Wow.
So suddenly, the entire disembarkation timeline stretches out. A passenger who planned to walk off the ship at 9:30 a.m. might not hit the curb until 11:30 a.m.
Which brings us right back to our opening scenario of standing on the curb missing a flight.
Yep.
And, the cruise line handles the logistics for anything booked internally. Carnival's notification explicitly stated that any line-booked shore excursions affected by the port time changes in Mexico are automatically adjusted.
Yeah, the cruise line communicates directly with those local operators, so you don't have to worry about that.
Right. But the liability rests entirely on the passenger for anything booked independently. If you arrange, like, a private snorkeling charter in Cabo, you must manually contact that vendor to negotiate a new time slot based on the shifted anchor times.
And more importantly, you have to audit your post-cruise travel arrangements.
Yes. Anyone booked on these altered fall 2026 Panorama sailings needs to immediately recheck their morning flight transfers out of Los Angeles or Long Beach airports, because a 10 a.m. docking time makes a pre-noon flight practically impossible to catch.
It's just a domino effect. The mechanics of the industry are so deeply interconnected.
They really are.
A crowded anchorage in Baja California forces a captain to adjust their cruising speed, which delays a customs clearance in Southern California, which forces a family to rebook a flight to the Midwest.
It definitely changes the way you look at a booking confirmation. I mean, the next time you secure a cabin for a week at sea, take a moment to realize that the captain on the bridge is only one part of the navigation equation.
Absolutely.
The true course is being plotted by international treaties, immigration policies, and local marine traffic jams. So it is really worth asking yourself, what unseen global shift is currently underway, quietly rewriting the itinerary you just paid for?
Something to think about.
Thanks for listening to Cruise News. Visit cruisenews.io to catch up on the latest updates and sign up for free email alerts.